Oh God, yeah. Can you imagine? It's gonna be like a
Mm-hmm.
5 minute nonsense.
Yep.
What? Why isn't it working? I
Well,
what?
is it coming back?
Of course, of all days for this to happen on. Oh, it says live.
Oh.
Oh, oh,
Hey.
oh. Guys, let me tell you,
We're
this is
back
not my
here.
day. This is not my day.
We did
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CG Cookie live stream. We do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time. And that's -6 GMC if you're outside of the States. Today, we're doing a community critique stream. Thank you all for submitting. We chose 9 at random. I'm going to finish up the marketing really quick, and then we're going to go ahead and jump right into it because we're already falling behind. Oh. And while we are joining in, or while everyone's coming in, actually, Sean, do you want to first say why you find constructive critiques important for artists, and then I'll give my little two
Oh, yeah,
cents.
yeah, yeah. The biggest thing with critiques, I think that a lot of artists themselves, like art is very, very personable. So it's almost like you're putting a piece of yourself in your artwork, and I think a lot of people get extremely discouraged from critiques when really critiques at the like really what they are is that is just another artist and like kind of a difference in opinion of actually wanting to help you succeed, succeed in like and have you learn about maybe the flaws that they see that you don't particularly see just yet. And so having that and having a good critique given to you, it could be literally like almost life changing when it comes to that. So I always think critiques are extremely necessary and do not get discouraged at all. So keep an open mind and ask questions.
Or defensive.
Yeah,
I think
or
that was the
defensive,
biggest
yeah.
thing that I had to learn in college was to absorb the critique and not take it so personally, and almost how not to be so sensitive. Um, one sec. Oops. Ugh.
Oh, somebody loves my glasses. Thank you. Thank you for my.
Okay, I think we're good. Yeah, so this is the last time we're going to do one of these community streams on Twitch. From now on, we're going to only offer them to the pro members on cgcookie.com.
I'm only offered to the pro members.
Oh, and
Worth-
Tigel's here.
worth that
Hi,
much.
Tigel. It's been a while. I hope everything with school went well. Okay, so I'm going to switch over here. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm done rambling with Sean.
Yeah.
We'll have this like in the middle so they can hear you too. You might have to scoot forward though. Ooh.
There we go. Good.
Yeah. Okay, so before I start painting and critiquing, I'm going to echo what Sean said, and also to know that the reason that we do this is not to offend you guys or try to push you down. If anything, when someone gives you an honest, constructive critique, it's because they're trying to help you, and they are offering advice that maybe you're not able to see yet. It's not meant to be insulting. It's just one of those things when you get so absorbed with your own art, you don't see the mistakes or the things that aren't working because you're so focused on what is. So the whole purpose of doing critiques and sharing your art with others and getting feedback is to improve your own skill level. So don't feel embarrassed to do it. Don't be selfish, and don't be too proud. I think we all have to swallow our ego every now and then and allow others to help us in kind of leveling up our own skill level.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go through each of these, and I'm going to go through each username, what they wanted to see improvements on, and then...
Actually, before we do that, I got a quick question for
Question,
you, really. Did you ever get like defensive at all when you got critiques or anything like that? Like maybe in the beginning, or were always really, really open to hearing?
Oh, good question. In college, I think I was so awkward that I didn't know how to respond. I'm sure in my head I was pretty defensive, but I just kind of let it seep in. But once you get a critique and you really have it help your work, I think from that point forward, you allow yourself to like sit back more and let it soak in. What about you?
I definitely think in the beginning I felt like I was being like attacked, but also at the same time, like the people that were critiquing me were a bunch of tattoo artists, and sometimes tattoo artists aren't very nice people.
Oh yeah.
So so they were very like they were very very like opinionated to where like they weren't constructive at all. They were uh, quite biased. So it was just kind of something that um, didn't wasn't as extremely helpful, but it was still okay.
Well, they were more aggressive, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you feel like there's benefits to being more aggressive versus being more passive on getting a critique?
I think they both have their benefits. They both have their benefits and they both have their consequences to where maybe something like with being aggressive, it's enough to kind of like push you in a direction like, okay, well, maybe they are right. Or maybe this is something that I really, really need to work on and I'm just not listening. And it kind of like, it almost makes you reflect about yourself rather than your art. And then being passive is something to where it's almost like, it kind of puts you in this thing to where you hear it but you don't actually like listen to it, you know, to where you're like, oh yeah like thank you, but then you just keep doing what you normally do.
Yeah. And honestly, that's why you want to get critiques from someone that you respect. I think it just is easier for you to like let your guard down when you feel that someone that is critiquing your work is quote unquote better than you are. But that's not to say you should disregard someone that maybe isn't even in the art field. I've gotten a critique from my own mother before, and she pointed out something. I was like, actually, Mom, that was a great point. I never noticed that before.
Are we quiet? People keep asking if we're quiet.
Probably a little bit. I can try to talk louder. I'm trying my best. You might have to
No.
just move over. Like, this is a lot of space.
This would be like, just
Just
push
lean
push the mic
Just
into
stick
my
it
mouth.
in your mouth.
Like, ready for the critique, everybody?
Okay, so, like I said, we're going to start one by one. We're going to say what you wanted to see and then our thoughts.
Yes.
So, first is Christy McVey. Oh, let me start our timer, though. We're going to do 10 minutes for each. And then we'll take questions in between each critique here. Okay, so for Christy McVey, you said you were going through an art block right now, and you felt the face and skin color was off, and the shoulders also feel off. Now, when I first look at this, I feel like you're going for simplicity, and I think there are times when this can really work. The thing that kind of threw me off, though, was your shadow here. Oops. Right here. And when you add in a shadow like that, I feel you need to keep it consistent everywhere, because then you're saying that there's a light source up here and it's falling on our subject matter. Actually, it's more like that. And it's casting that shadow. So now everywhere that should be in shadow doesn't seem to be in shadow, especially since you have a shadow under the head on the neck, but it's not falling on the sweater, or the hoodie, I should say. So immediately on my little pre-paint over, and actually it should be even bigger, I think, have that shadow cast on the hoodie as well. And as we're going through these, I want to make it clear that I don't think you necessarily have to do realism, or if that's the style that you have to necessarily go with. But when you add in something that indicates a light source, you got to keep it consistent, even in a more stylized looking piece. The other thing was with the face, I think you need to keep it tighter. That's what I wrote. I have my little notes here. Keep it tight, especially around the lip area and the nose. Let me see where I put that. So you can see even below with the mouth. I like that you're noticing the little details with the face and the nuances where there's bumps and curves. I think this is a little overemphasized though. And whenever you have such sharp lines, you want to make sure that you don't have soft lines in the same depth of field. Otherwise, it also throws off some inconsistencies. So keep it tight if you want to keep it tight, but if you have it more blur and more soft, then have it be more soft everywhere. You can't just pick and choose. Otherwise, it almost looks unfinished or misrendered. The other thing with the eye is, let me see here. So in this area, it gets a little muddy, and then it felt like the black is actually a bit harsh. Let me zoom in for you guys. And I can tell that you are looking at the shadow placement because there is indication that the light source is overhead. But I think the way that you rendered it almost contradicts it because there's a shadow here, but there's not a shadow underneath the eye. So if you're going to... Sorry,
You doing
guys.
okay?
I think so.
Yeah.
So if you're going to add those shadows, make them consistent. And the last thing that I have was look at the way that your clothing is falling. I'm very fascinated and interested by drawing and painting wrinkles on clothing and fabric just because I think it's such a nice little level of detail that can really enhance your piece. And for this, clothes you typically aren't this heavy, so you don't need this big sagging wrinkle in the front, and like every wrinkle is like pulled down. Instead, I tried to find a similar reference, and you can see on his chest, it's actually more flat, where the more wrinkles are on the actual arm itself. So in your piece, I think it would actually help if you kept this more simple, but then have that contrasted by a more complicated arm roll. And just imagine when people are wearing the clothes, where are the wrinkles going to be forming? If he pulls the sweater up at all, you're going to get these tons of line wrinkles, these horizontal ones. And then even after it goes back down, there's like an imprint, and you can see them here of where those wrinkles would lie. So those are the subtleties that I want you to pick up on. I can already tell you're seeing them because you're adding the wrinkles. I think they're just being misplaced. So as I'm going forward, I'm going to start painting over, and then I'll pass it off to Sean and for what you want to say.
Oh, am I doing that now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you were like, oh, I'm going to paint and then explain.
No.
No, I definitely agree with Tim. I had more issues with the lighting, and the lighting itself, especially when you have like that heavy shadow like coming off onto the neck. That's something that really should be complemented around everywhere. But the thing is, though, that what I did like about this is that I actually really like the colors that you chose. They're all sitting really well with each other. And the thing is, like, the face actually has enough warmth to it to create enough contrast, which is really nice. But what I think you could push, though, is especially with that, is playing with actual colors of the shadows. Normally, it depends on the type of lighting that you have. So if you have a warm light, you're going to have cooler shadows. Or if you have a cool light, you're going to have warmer shadows. It's just kind of how light works. I don't really know the logistics of it, but that's just how it works. So that's something I think you can actually push to where, like, let's say if you had this nice warm light, you can actually push more purples onto the hoodie, and also more purples, like actually more purples or blues or anything like that, near like on the neck and everything. I think that would definitely just create just more like complementing like colors and everything. I'm trying to think what else.
Actually, really quick, the other thing is, look at the seams. You can see his is actually a bit higher, but usually they are, the way that sweaters are made is there's a seam that goes down the edge. You can see it on the top of my shoulder here, and they're usually in halves, and then they stitch them together. So even implying just a little bit of that seam up here is another one of those extra little details that kind of showcases that you understand and you pick up those little details on material.
One thing too is that I always recommend, especially when you're doing any type of character, anything like that, or any type of anatomy, is to always flip your canvas.
Yes.
Yeah, flipping your canvas literally is like a godsend when it comes to this stuff. It's basically looking at something like it was in a mirror, or if it's upside down or anything like that, to where you're actually going to see things more as shapes rather than what they are. So originally, if you were to draw this character, let's say, you know, like you were like facing to the right or the left or anything, your eye itself, like you're already telling yourself like, okay, this is a face, this is what it needs to look like from this point of view. But when you flip it, your eye does this funny thing to where it actually turns everything into a shape. And you'll be able to see like if those shapes are sitting well together or not. especially with anatomy, if you're able to see if it's actually correct. So that's something that I always recommend. And whenever you're drawing a character person, just anything with perspective, just always flip your canvas.
Did you want to make note of the nose and how you saw?
Yes, the nose. When I saw the nose, especially from the One Direction, One Direction, especially especially when I saw it from that way, it did something to where it tend to scoop in a little bit more, to where I think and it depends on how this person looks. I don't know how they look in real life or anything like that. But I also think that, the nose should be more placed in like an angle that kind of covers up a little bit more of that eye, a little bit pushed out more rather than look so sunken into the face. Because you have to remember how the brow line normally comes over like the nose, and then it goes back into the bridge and then out into the nose again.
Because otherwise, I think this would be your side silhouette.
Yeah. So and you'd have a very, 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 very small brow.
So Sean's saying push this out further.
Yes.
But then when you do that, you kind of have to adjust the rest of the face, which I know may kind of be annoying, but it's worth it.
But yeah, and that's another thing too that flipping the canvas can tell you. It can tell you is if your facial anatomy is off, or arm or leg or anything like that, or shoulders too is what you were saying. One thing though is that the shoulders actually don't bother me. And I learned this from tattooing, is that especially when you look at somebody from far away, there's always going to be a shoulder that's going to be lower than the other. I was going to say nobody's actually a perfect symmetrical thing, but at the same time there still is, you do have to kind of work within the rules of making sure things look nice
I totally agree. The only thing I think I saw is the way that you have the skin line here. It almost looks like it's going out. And you got to remember that there's a thickness to fabric, especially one that implies thickness like a hoodie. So when you're going down, you almost want to give some breathing room for that hoodie to go over the skin, and it adds an extra layer. So if this is the line that you're going with, I would raise the hoodie up probably to here. Or if you want to take more of the easier route, you can just lower the skin in there.
Yeah.
And make it feel, that's too low though. See how that's now too low? You want to make it feel, that's our timer, like it's being worn. Because this line's almost like perfectly on it. It's almost too perfect. So you want to raise it just a touch. Okay, I hear you, timer. Angela's on here. Hi, Ange. How are you doing? Oh my gosh, I can see clearly now.
The rain is gone. If we can finish this song. That would be a feat. Yeah, that would be a feat.
Alright, so we're going to move on to the next. Let me see if we have a few questions though here. Tijel says all tattoo artists are very lovely, friendly, and emotional.
Oh, yeah.
And we have the friendliest, loveliest, and most emotional
the
tattoo
most
artist.
Emotional one right here.
J-Mail says, how would you handle a critique of a tattoo you already put on someone?
That is something that you kind of have to live with, that permanence that you put on that person. And that's something that you actually go and work in the drawing phase rather than the tattooing phase. So it's like, let's say you did something and it looked a little off, or maybe wasn't rendered as well. That's something that you should go back into maybe like your stencil or your line drawing or anything, to where you're like, okay, well, this, make a note of that, and like this should be fixed, this should be fixed. And then when it comes to a technical end on tattooing, that's just something you have to remember to do while you're tattooing for the next time. So it's a very very committal medium. So it honestly, like, it can make and break you at times. But it's something that you just kind of got to learn with and roll with at times, because you can't beat it.
Lewis says, what program do we use? We use OBS. Okay, so thank you, Christy, for submitting. I hope you picked up some neat little tips and tricks. I just want to say, though, for each of these, it may even sound like we're down talking them. I just want to reiterate that we're doing this to help you guys, and in no regard make it sound like you're on like a wrong path or you're doing it completely wrong. I think especially with yours, Christy, This has a lot of potential,
Mm-hmm.
and it's already pretty great. It's now like nitpicking and getting into those details because you have more of a simplistic look to your stuff. So it's now adding onto it without going like full realism, but still having that style. So thank you again, she says. And Christy says, thank you so much. Everything you said completely made sense. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next tier. So this is Art of Wobbles, also known as Caleb. And
Art of Wobbles.
Art of Wobbles. And for this one, you said it felt unfinished, it was too static, and you weren't sure if the color was right. Now, my initial impression of this was very flat. I read it as you add in this isolated singular light, and I don't think you're reflecting enough in the actual character itself. And you're given this opportunity to add in such an emphasis on this light source, so immediately there almost should be like a gradient going down the body, and it's only emphasizing that this light source is the reason that we're able to see this so clearly, and it brings your eye up the body. So something as simple as a gradient can be your best friend, and that's something I'm actually going to reiterate on a few of them. Don't underestimate gradients in your work as a good foundation to work on top of. I think a lot of us artists get stuck on adding gradients on in the end to really make our stuff look nice, but maybe try adding it even in the beginning and seeing how that really pulls your eye in different directions. And especially for this one, it was reading very flat without it, and just look at the difference already. Your eye immediately gets pulled up. My other notes were to have a purposeful gradient. That's what I called it. And have it be less stiff in your edges. Because I know you were wondering if a character like this, if it's okay to have a stiff pose and be less dynamic. Yes, I think most concept art is supposed to be more stiff and static. Well, not stiff. It's supposed to be more static to showcase what the character is wearing, their height, their proportions, and really let the 3D modeler or whoever you're presenting it to read it clearly. So usually with dynamics, you're playing off of something that excites the viewer or something maybe for marketing purposes. But for pure concept art, it's okay to have a standing pose. But that doesn't let you get away with having stiffness. There's a difference between static pose and a stiff pose. So with this one, I was even talking with Sean, I like that you have the breakup of the branches, especially in the feet.
Mm-hmm.
It feels organic, but where you lose it, I think, is where it becomes completely flat. Let some of those branches break off, some of that bark peel back, and I think you'll see a much more exciting tree character. And
Oh, sorry. Actually, you know what I just noticed that you pointed that out is that this all right here looks. I mean, it does. It looks wonderful near the legs and everything. To where it does seem like a tree, and then especially when it gets up here, it almost turns into like stone, like near the.
here especially.
Yeah, like especially like in the chest area and everything. It's almost like too perfect, I guess. Which is one thing with nature is especially doing studies of nature. I didn't mean to interrupt you. But especially with studies of nature, as nothing is perfect in nature, which actually makes nature perfect. And the thing with that is that so when you're drawing any type of tree or anything like that, I actually really like to look at crabapple trees. Because they tend to like turn and twist and do like really awesome shapes and movement. And I think you have a nice understanding of that. You have a really good foundation, especially with some of the branch shapes that you're making. I just think you can push them more and especially add a little bit more treeness to it, maybe adding little leaves or even like a little moss or something like that. And also too, just like almost like random like twigs coming out just to push the character just a little bit more.
And the other thing I was going to say is you kind of understand the tree material that it doesn't reflect light that much. It's more absorbing, it's matte. And you showcase some of the pink being interlaced in the actual texture on the wood, but you got to keep it consistent where the tree, wherever the branches are kind of facing outward or more toward us, you could almost let those be more wood-like or more of this gray color that you have, and let the areas that are in pink really stand out, and the areas that are in shadow be in shadow. So especially when I added in the gradient, you can see the back of the head. You really should keep more of this in shadow, and then that contrast of where the light is landing on will be even stronger. Oh no, we didn't reset the
Oh, I would say we already went like
5.
minutes
Okay.
in, yeah.
So I think for you, it's going to be adding in, once again, a gradient. It's going to be your best friend. And working on texture. So I'm going to keep painting on the area while Sean talks. But the other thing is, if this blue light is kind of like the central life force or whatever it is, I would really emphasize the glowing factor of it. When I added in the gradient, it kind of lost some of that glow. But what's great is before, you can kind of notice the glow, but it's not that impactful. Now that we have a gradient and it's darker, when I paint the light back on, it'll appear so much brighter because of the contrast now that it's on top of a darker value. So the blue will stand out even more. So those were my main notes. And then whenever you're trying to make something non-organic or organic or not human look like a human anatomy, you're in the right direction, and I can see that you're almost like trying to pull the muscles that are in the leg anatomy, but work it more on the wood side rather than the anatomical side, because I think it gets a little lost here and it becomes too smooth on the edges, where I like where it's more broken up with texture and trees. All right, so you go.
I think for my own personal taste, and I mentioned this to you, is for the character itself, is that I'm not a huge fan of the stump that you have going on in the chest area. He's got like a stump stomach, which I think it would have been stronger if you took that out almost completely, and made more like like it was going inside basically, and you can see more of the inside of him, and it was the kind of this glowing like blue light with branches all wrapped around it. Sorry, I dropped my pencil. And and just pushing like Tim said, just like pushing like that nature and everything, and almost just adding more nature elements to it, especially with anatomy too. Is like down near the knees. They have, so you have this front leg, and this front leg looks a lot shorter than the back leg, and with that, just to pay attention to perspective and everything and how it works. So that's just something. Also another thing too is if flipping the canvas will make that problem go away of just doing that. I'm trying to think of what else do I have in my notes.
Actually, because you'll probably see when we flip it. Might take a second because there's so many layers.
Yeah.
Let me turn off what I did. So you can see how this back leg looks a little too thin and too skinny compared to this front leg. So what I'm doing even with the paint over is I'm just bringing it forward with kind of a mid-tone value, and then you grab that lighter value and then you just paint right on top. Because the great thing about bark and organic texture is it, like Sean said, you can allow it to be more messy. You can have it be imperfect, because in a weird way that actually makes it more perfect. The more structured and like compositionally balanced in terms of having everything be perfect on one side of the character to the other side, I think it actually loses a lot of the organic quality that you're looking for.
I like this question that Tidgel asked. It says, when receiving critiques from an artist that's a lower level than you, are you more standoffish/skeptical versus getting a critique from a legendary pro artist? I have many words on this.
I think instinctually there might be some level of ego going on where you're like, well, they don't know what they're talking about. But I promise you, if you listen to everyone, not just people that you look up to, you'll learn something that maybe you didn't see before. My own mother, who knows nothing about art, told me one of my pieces, the hand structure, or the way that I did a hand swipe on a window was wrong based on how you was sitting. And I looked at it, the more I looked at it, I was like, dang, she's right. And she knows nothing about art, but she was able to pick on something that I wasn't able to see, and that's all I do every day. So yes, I think you have to learn to swallow your pride and just take every critique you get. Something that I learned from one of my old art friends is to write down all the things that the person that's giving you the critique is giving. Just write them all down and just let them continue talking and just absorb what they're saying. And then after they go away, or even that night, look at your notes again and then kind of decipher for yourself. Does this...
You got it.
Sorry.
You got it, boo.
Is this is this appropriate, or does this reflect my piece? Do I feel like it's good advice? Do I feel like it's coming from their own personal taste? If so, leave that one out. But the ones that are helping and reflecting your piece to, get it to a better stage, take that advice and use it. So what did you have to say?
Mine is actually looking at it as more from a standpoint of not really seeing anybody on a certain type of level depending on where they are with their career, I guess. And also too, like with skill level too, like, yes, like skill level has like a huge thing of it. But at the same time, you're still getting critiqued from an artist, basically. Even if somebody is not at a skill level that you're at, or something that's lower or higher or anything, you're still getting critique from someone who has an opinion. And that's kind of the way I look at it, is just even, I'm trying to think where my words are.
Okay. I think I disagree a little bit.
All right.
Like, if Alan Williams was to critique one of my pencil drawings, does it have more weight in my mind? Yes.
Yes.
Only because I think he actually has the technical prowess to push me and elevate my own work further, versus someone like my mom or someone that would be considered not as good. And
but even then, I still see it. So it's like you kind of have to maybe compartmentalize like where you're getting a critique from. So let's say like your mom is giving you a critique. You're getting a critique from somebody who's more of a viewer rather than an artist.
That's a good point.
And then you have Alan Williams, who has all this experience and has this knowledge, and especially someone that you look up to. He's probably looking at your work as more of an artist, as if he were to do it, So even like I said, even if it's somebody who does have a lower skill level than you or anything like that, I still feel their opinions still matter.
Absolutely.
And not to like put them on any type of level or anything like that.
So you can see if I build up that other leg there, see how now when I take it off, it just feels so much flatter. The only thing is I think I used too light of colors. I could actually darken that up. But you can see how now it breaks up the leg and it just feels more organic going up. So just keep focusing on that, and I think doing more studies on those materials will help. Okay. So let's take one or two questions. Tim, drink more tea.
I know people are worried about you.
Sorry, guys, but I didn't want to not do the stream because this one was specific for you guys. All right. Could you read this?
This one right here.
Yeah, this really long one.
This one was basically a response to Tidjul, but I gave a critique to an artist before who had been a lead artist on Tim's Burton Alice in Wonderland. It was on conceptart.org. He was struggling in the anatomy of his character, so I gave him some ideas how to improve. He was grateful.
I guess that wasn't a comment.
Yeah.
Oh, my bad.
It didn't list the comment because I was a high school student. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just another example of just, like, you're an artist, and if you're asking for help or you're asking for a critique, you're going to get it from any other artist, depending on their skill level, and I just think you should take everything that they say with it, like, if it can help you improve or if it's something that you see, and it's more of an opinion rather than a critique.
Yeah, I always say take it with a grain of salt, because there's some people that will give critiques, especially other artists, and they'll give critiques based on their own personal preference of what style they like or what art they want to see. So if they're keeping your best intention in mind and like your style and where you want to go, I think those are the best people to get constructive criticism from. But yeah, never just disregard anyone because they're perceived of less than.
I love getting critiques from my mom.
Do you really?
Yeah. Because my mom doesn't understand like art at all.
Neither does mine.
Or like she'll just see it just as like face value. Like she doesn't go into like any type of like metaphorical sense of it at all. So like when I see her, like I treat her as like, okay, like let's say if my stuff was literally on a wall and she would walk by it, like this is her thoughts on it. So maybe I can improve upon it to have maybe a better viewer feedback rather than artist feedback.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so we're gonna move on to. Let me start the timer this time. So this is J Mill with her strawberry lemonade submission, and the first, and you wanted to know, is there enough separation, and does it feel like a clashing of styles? So when I look at this, the thing that I like the most is your creativity. I think it really shines, especially in this piece. In the character, I love that you incorporated the hair as the mechanism for her to clean with, and that you didn't just go for lemonade. You took it to a different level and said, you know what, I'm going to try to make a strawberry lemonade character.
Strawberry lemonade. Anyway.
I think it works really well. I think from this point forward, for you, it's going to be rendering and really making those details pop, as well as kind of focusing on the way that you're shading. It reads kind of very flat right now, except for the floor that she's standing on. This floor, I feel, is wonderful. It almost looks like it was made in 3D and then you brought it over to paint over, but it has such a nice quality of rendering where I can tell that it has this reflective quality. There's highlights, and then there's some reflectiveness going on the floor itself. So there's a lot of little properties that you added into this floor to make it feel more like hard candy or like glass tile, but it's red. So great job on that. Moving forward, I said on my notes here, consistency in lighting. And I think one of the big things I noticed, where was the, oh yeah, so in my initial little paint over, there's even things like cast shadows are going to be your best friend to learn. You're really good at doing soft shadows, but now start incorporating some harder cut shadows, especially where they're going to be from cast shadows. So the best example would be under her skirt. Add in a sharp line where that shadow is being casted from the bottom of her skirt onto her leg. And do that on either side. Because when it's soft, it almost implies that there's so much bounce lighting that it's actually, the lighting's going up her leg and it's creating this soft gradient into shadow.
Yeah, actually, now that I'm looking at that floor, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's great.
It's like on point. Just boom, tile floor.
The other thing was, I think the cast shadows will help, and if you incorporate them everywhere, but start looking at where areas look flat. I think the bucket is the best example of it is so flat. Well, I thank you, Arc Beasts, for following. The easiest way to do that, gradient. Like I said, I'm going to reiterate that many times because gradients can help pull the eye in a direction and also make something look more flat and static become more interesting for the viewer. And just like you did with the floor, I would add in a little highlight on the edge there. So in keeping your lighting consistent, in this upper arm, you can see how this is another area where there's a shadow, but it really doesn't make sense if this clothing is so tight on her arm that there wouldn't be a cast shadow falling on her arm itself. So instead, push the lemon tighter, and if you want to have a little bit of a shadow, have a little orange. Let me zoom in. You can see in my rough paint over here how it just reads then more of like the lighting. And don't be afraid to go dark with your shadows. I think it's a bit too flat, especially where this color and this color is the same, when in reality there would probably be more light being able to hit this area than back here, so it should be darker. Okay. Oh jeez.
Oh my. Unprofessional.
Not my day.
Unprofessional. It's so rude. Yeah, this is. Shut it off.
So then my last thing was, even with the back of the head, there's another area where you can have a cast shadow based on where that lighting's coming from, and the head would cast a shadow on the hair. And oh yeah, and then I also added another subtle gradient going up the broom. And the one thing that me and Sean both agreed on was her hair have a more interesting dynamic S. I felt like there's more interesting shapes going on with your pre-sketches. And with your big render, I would pull it down and really give it a nice hook to it. And also, there's a really bad tangent going on the side of the bucket from her skirt. So just be aware of tangents, and that's something that I think both of us are going to bring up more
Yeah.
as we go through these. I think you guys got to be more aware of where your tangents lie.
Oh, I just noticed there's one on the shoe right there.
Oh, yeah, right there,
Yeah.
too. So just something to keep in mind. And then I guess my last thing would be using reference for grabbing a bucket. Her hand feels a little small, and we'd probably see more of the side of her hand than what we're seeing now. Okay, your turn.
I mean, you pretty much hit everything.
I think it more to you really quick.
You literally pretty much hit like everything that I wanted to say. Here, I'll get out of your way.
Just pull the mic closer to you.
Especially with, I'm just gonna scoot forward. I guess I could move the mic closer. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty much everything that I wanted to say. Especially like when I first looked at the piece, it was very, very, very flat. And that's just something of just knowing where you want your light to hit, or even just pushing just a little bit of darks. And one thing too, especially with the first piece that we critiqued, is that you can also play with colors to where you can move actually more, or you can do more cooler colors, or cooler shadows, or warmer shadows, or whatever you want. That's one thing that I've been noticing, especially throughout these critiques, is that there's a bit of people seem to be going just a little bit too light, I guess, or almost people seem to be afraid of dark. And I think people get confused when it comes to when people say, "Oh, you should add your darks," or "You should add, more darks," and people almost tend to think of, "Oh, should I use black?" No, don't do that. I would honestly say maybe use something that's just like a very, very like let's say you have this red color, and if you were to take this red color and in the color wheel, you were to take it and then move it more into the purple area, and this also just go just a little bit more dark and saturated, so you can kind of push those darks, and you can make it see, and you can make or separate like all the different types of materials that you have and everything. That's my biggest thing with it, is just trying to create like structure within the shape itself using those values. I know you came back at the right time,
Yeah,
but
right.
Also too is push the design. I actually really like this design. I think it's really cool. I think you could push it a little bit more, especially with adding maybe like little design works. Yeah, like little design works on the apron. Maybe like little stuff on like the bucket, like maybe little like yellow polka dots or something like that on the bucket. And also too to add more of the licorice hair, what you have going on. To maybe make it a little bit more frilled out. Have it come in front of the shoulder. Have it. What are you doing there?
I'm just seeing with like color consistencies.
Okay.
So I kind of like that you're playing with blue. I feel like that's a color I wouldn't associate with the Lemon Made contest. But I feel like for keeping it consistent with the top of her little hairpiece, especially I didn't really realize, I think these are meant to be like limes, and that's like a lime holder.
Gotcha.
I love that. So why not match the head accessories, her eye color, with the apron she's wearing, and bring it all together, especially since green and red are such complementaries, that I would pull that down. Now, this is where it could get more into like personal preference, so take that with a grain of salt, but I'm just letting you see the difference of when it's green and blue, and how colors, when they're next to each other, the association and the feeling that you get when looking at it. But I do agree with Sean, though. I think it's a little too plain in the front, and having more details will add more interest to it.
Yeah, just a little bit more. And then also too, like, could you actually do something for me? Take this color of her hair and kind of like make like little kind of like frills like coming off, like maybe like right here, just like little swoops. Go swoop it out.
What do you mean?
Like if you were to kind of yeah, to where it almost like it's licorice, but it's still kind of
Oh, I thought it was taffy.
or taffy or licorice or whatever. But it still just adds just a little bit more interest to it.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You know, to where it's not like this completely like straight like solid object. To where in the sketch you can see there's little strands almost hanging off.
Right here. And even let those be seen. I didn't even see those until you pointed them out. I would pull them down a bit further. And okay, this is another thing where it's more stylistically opinionated on my end, But the area here gets kind of lost between the back of your head, this little swoopy here, and the hair. What you could do is lighten up the back part. Now, like I said, this is definitely not going on like realism lighting or anything. Oh, our timer. But I do this all the time. I call it reverse contrast. I don't know what it's actually called, but it's the idea of separating forms from each other just based on value. And it definitely has more of a fantastical interpretation. Oops. And then I would bring that around. Actually, maybe I do like it more in shadow. But there's a thing that you see, especially like on Tumblr art, where the further something is back or the more recessed, it's lighter in color. Especially with
Tumblr
like
art, that's just art in general.
I mostly
atmospheric,
associate it.
yeah.
Like Key does this all the time.
Atmospheric perspective.
Where the back legs will be lighter in value and the ones in the front will be darker, and it just gives more contrast. So something to think about. It's more of a style, maybe test it out, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way. I just wanted to give that feedback. Okay.
Do you want to go look through questions?
What's the question we have? Tijel says, what's the worst reaction you ever had on a critique you gave, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, what's the worst one?
Okay. The worst one I ever gave was I was telling an art friend that the well, you go first. Let me think of how I'm gonna word this.
I had one to where it was when I was working in in the tattoo shop, and I forgot what the piece actually was, but I was saying something about the lighting, like how like the anatomy was off and everything like that, and the guy, he just got so defensive, and I don't know if he was having a bad day or anything like that, but he actually walked out. I don't know if it must have been something internal like he was struggling with, but I remember mentioning something to him, and I was just like, oh yeah, I was like, there's something, I was like, I believe there's something wrong with this, like maybe you can do this to pull it out, or maybe you can do this next time to pull it out. And that's the thing, especially with tattoos, is you have to say, do this next time, rather than change it now, because you can't. Once the person walks out the door, like, that's it. And he was not happy with that, and he basically called me a butthole, and he walked out. So.
Yeah. They're very comfortable in who they are. Okay. My worst one was I was giving someone a critique on their arm anatomy, and it turned into this thing of how they were doing too many studies and they weren't applying it to their actual pieces of their illustrations. So I was saying that you can do your studies within the pieces that you're working on. So if you, even like the one we're about to work on, what a awesome way to try something new, like a character hanging upside down on a broom. But if you're going to do something that is this adventurous, you definitely need to use reference, and you're going to be experimenting a lot. But you can do that within the piece. So don't feel like you necessarily have to do studies before jumping in. I think I've learned the most from my failure. Well, yeah, everyone learns the most from their failure. Yeah. So on every piece you do, try to do something new within it. And that way you'll always be growing as an artist. And you don't necessarily have to be doing thousands of studies. And I think the reason it became the worst is because then it was turned on me. And then it was like deflecting what I was saying and trying to figure out where I was coming from, when really it was trying to be helpful. But I think it can get very sensitive very fast. And I think as artists, we need to swallow our pride and not get so defensive and sensitive, and allow the person critiquing or reviewing the art to get out what they have to say. And then, like I said, just in your mind, make mental notes and then review it later. Never get defensive. It's honestly the worst thing an artist can do, especially at an interview or a portfolio review. Do not get defensive. I don't care what your excuse is. Yes, I've actually seen this happen where we went to WB Games when I was in school. We all wanted to get this internship. It was in Chicago at WB. And they would critique our portfolios. And I remember, and you're standing in a line, so you get to hear everyone else. It was like super traumatic. And I swear every artist gave excuses for their portfolio. They'd be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I just didn't have enough time for that," or "The printer wasn't working today,"
Oh this, oh that.
or it's like
Yeah.
they don't want to hear it. They don't.
Yeah.
So when they're giving your
They're
feedback,
doing their job.
rather than you
Yeah.
talking, you listen. That was like, I think that was my moment of clarity, realizing just listen. And yeah, they might be kind of harsh, but that's good. That means they're trying to help you.
They are trying to, yeah, and that's the whole thing with a critique is that it's not meant to. I mean, yeah. There's a fine line between giving a critique and then also just saying just what you don't like.
Yes.
But I think that's more of an internal issue with the person.
Are you ready to move on?
What was I about to say real quick? I don't remember. Let's move on.
All right. So next,
Actually, I'm gonna
Timer
get more
start.
tea.
all right, I'll start it.
I'll be right back.
We have Owen with your submission of the boy which was a part of the Halloween contest last year. And like I said, this is a really ambitious pose, and I'm very proud of you. And I think I can still see in terms of your art prowess, it still feels kind of young, and I feel like you still have a lot to grow, but I can already tell that you're not afraid. You're willing to do something different. And my first note was to just keep going because it feels so unique. I can already kind of get a personality from this character, even though I think there are a lot of things technically that need improvement, whether it's the material, the shading, the lighting, the anatomy, whatever it might be. So while I'm going through this, I don't want it to sound discouraging because I'm actually very proud of what I'm looking at here. It's just really reworking a lot of just the fundamentals. So let's go through a few before Sean gives his notes, and then I'll start my paint over. So first things first, what a great pose. But it feels wonky in the execution. I think the best thing you can do with something like this is to look up reference. And since, to me, when I saw this, I was like, okay, well, if I was looking for reference on Google search or wherever, I would probably type in hanging off of monkey bars upside down or something. So I found this one, and I think it's a perfect representation of how the fabric and the material would look when you're upside down. You know, your shirt's coming up, you have your belly exposed, and the wrinkles themselves on the shirt is what I want you to look at.
That's a really good reference.
Right?
Yeah.
There's like
That's
a
awesome.
weight to the clothing, and the way that it's lit, it gives so much emphasis on those wrinkles and the contrast between light and dark that I think this is the type of reference you need. Or I always talk about how you should create your own reference. We are our own free walking resource. Why not use us? And especially if you have roommates like this, you can go ahead and ask them to take a photo. I mean, this one's a little strange, but artists are strange. We're all strange. So I think taking a photo of yourself in this pose would actually be beneficial. And when you're doing a pose like this, weighting I find very important on the human body. All of his weight right now is going to be on his knees and the underside of his legs, and it's holding him up. So you really want to make sure that it feels correct, because right now it feels kind of limber, and I know that this is more stylized, but you still want some of that weighting from realism to get pulled in here. Especially with his proportions, his neck feels rather large. And Sean was giving me a great point of, don't just flip this one horizontally, but because of the unique pose, flip it vertically and see what he'll look like right side up. And you can see here, it feels a bit wonky. The neck needs to be, let me grab, almost needs to be pulled back if this was supposed to be the shoulder area. And sometimes you may even have to do like an underlying anatomy sketch so you can kind of see where is everything lining up. Does it make sense? And I think in this case, his neck is far too long for the position you're going for. And actually, this arm feels all right. Something that I was taught in college, and this is one of the times I did get defensive when someone critiqued me, is always having your weapons or your secondary items facing the camera. In this case, it is... Let me get to it. Okay. So in this case, it's these cards or that's actually the shoe. That needs to read better. But the cards. Rather than having them all face the viewer, you should have a few that are sideways, a few that aren't perfectly facing the camera. And I see this, and I used to do this all the time, where if someone was holding a sword, even if it was like on the ground or behind their back, it would be flat, it would be perfectly facing the viewer. It would be like if we're doing Cloud's Final Fantasy VII sword and he's holding it, it'd be like it would be facing the viewer rather than something a little bit more dynamic where maybe it's coming out this way and then it gets smaller going back. So something to keep in mind, it's definitely more of an artistic, like, look at the shape that I'm incorporating in the scene, but it also reads a little unrealistic and more stiff. So I think if you're gonna do it purposely with the way that you're rendering it and have it feel accurate as possible. But when something's falling and it's so loose, especially like these cards, I would have them turning in space as if they're jumbling and, the wind or whatever is blowing them. So having them all face the camera just doesn't seem right.
Jumbling in the wind.
Jumbling in the
That's
wind.
my new band name.
My other notes were the skin feels very, very flat. I think right now you're working with one singular color, and then what it looks like is you're going lighter in that color and then slightly darker. Especially with
That's
skin.
still, though, but I do want to mention, I know that I'm interrupting you, but that's still, though, what they use, those skin tones right there, that's more than I think some people understand.
True.
Yeah, then...
The fact that you're not just using blatant black or white for highlights and shadows, that's
like,
great.
Like using that actual like brown tone with like that little bit of like purple in it, and it's just these warm tones and everything.
But my problem comes with if you pick up your eyedropper tool, or I'm sorry, first choose the color picker. If you go from one to the next, I can already tell how you're color picking and the hue isn't shifting at all. So what I would do is, let's say he's being lit by the moon, I would actually pull the color closer to cool. I mean, this is kind of hard because we're near the end.
Cool shadows.
And then his, cool highlight.
Yeah.
Warm
it'd be
shadows.
warm shadows, yeah.
So then the shadow color, I would actually pull closer to being warm. So now let me grab this. Oops, actually I'll go a little more. So now our spectrum could be something like this versus this. Because this, you're only shifting the value and the saturation, but not by much, where with this, you're now shifting the hue. But what I would also start looking into is your shadows are going to be more saturated. That's the way it's in life. Depending on your light source, I should say that first. But like, let's say it's an outdoor scene, your shadows are going to be more saturated because the sun, or in this case the moon, it's going to be bleaching and kind of washing out the color a bit, where the area in shadow is going to read more true to the color of the material because it's in shadow. There's no light influencing that color. So in this case, as we get more toward the shadow color, I could actually make it even more saturated as we go down. And I know that the further down I get, it might be intimidating. You can see how I'm not going toward black, but look how dark this one already looks just because of the contrast on the other colors. And then I would never go this dark, I don't think. But you can see that's really dark. But it only became so dark, or the second one became less dark looking because of that contrast. Something to keep in mind. And those were my main notes. And also for the fabric, I would do a lot of fabric studies. I think especially use reference, really look at where those wrinkles fall, especially with the pose like this.
It's a tough pose.
It's a very tough pose. Very ambitious. But I like that. I like when artists are like ambitious with pieces. I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna paint over some of the materials while Sean talks. Oh, I'm sorry,
No,
Sean.
it's fine. No, it's fine. I got thing. I actually do. You literally hit everything I wanted to say, but I actually kind of wanted to say, I know that we're like throwing a lot at you of just like, oh yeah, work on this, and that may seem very, very overwhelming. But really what it is, it's mostly just, they're all basics. And the thing is just like understanding just your fundamentals and your basics of what you can, what you can and can't do, and then you can push and pull what you want to do. And the thing is that with me, the biggest thing with this one is mostly just anatomy and gesture. I think this would be a perfect example is if you were to look up an artist. His name is Ryan Woodard, and he's an absolutely like incredible artist, and he just does gesture drawings, and his gesture drawings are incredible. He did a YouTube. It was almost like a YouTube like music video thing to where, and it was something to where he had these dancers. He recorded them, and then he just did gestures of it. And then he, basically, it was almost like what am I looking for? Like a camera, what is that called? Like snap motion or something like that, or stop motion, I think it was. He did like a stop motion where he took a picture of every one of his gestures, and it recreated what this dance was, but it was all gestures, and it was so beautiful to look at. And I did so many studies of those when I was doing any type of life drawing or anything like that. I don't really draw people. You don't really see that. But but at the same time,
you know how to.
Yeah. But it was still like very, very like very, very helpful. So
Actually, I'm glad you said that. What do you feel you learned from drawing people, even though you don't draw people on the daily? That's something you normally draw, but can't you say that you learned? I don't want to answer the question, but can't you say you felt like you learned a lot from doing those studies?
I learned a lot of almost like, I guess it's almost like reality and like correctness, I guess, to where it's just like, so you're learning. Sorry, you want to move? So you're learning like basically what looks correct. And with that, it almost trained my eye to where it's like, let's say I'm not even looking at a person, to where I'm looking at an animal or a tree or a plant or even like a building. It still trained my eye enough to look at like, okay, like, does this seem correct? And learning like correctness on how to draw it, and believability too. So that's what really helped. And also too, doing gestures. Gestures are really awesome because you can actually exaggerate the gesture, and you have that line of action. So that helped me in a way of learning how to create flow and overall shape, to where you can have things, flow into each other, and just the overall shape can just look really nice and complementive to what's going on around it. So that was the biggest thing, especially with not drawing people, just because I don't draw people. I'm sorry, I don't.
I think your people are actually great. You just don't do it enough, I think.
Really, now you're getting like caught up in the details.
So as I'm going forward, if something that I noticed is,
can I actually type the artist into the chat real quick?
Yeah. Looking at the hat, you can see how flat it looks. And I think this is a perfect example of doing a study, because the hat, especially a witch hat, is a cone. So a cone is one of the 4 basic forms that an artist can study. And just rounding it out and treating it like a cone rather than like a hat, you can see it more in its simplistic form. So as I render it out, you can see before and after how now it has more shape to it, because I'm rendering it out like a cone. And the more that you can break down shapes into the simple forms of a sphere, box, cylinder, and cone, cylinder and cone, the better. And it helped me a lot with shading, especially since I grew up with doing 3D modeling in college, where I would see forms differently than I used to paint them, and everything now had value to it, and I knew how to add value to it. So I think that's a perfect example for you to start with if you want to go ahead and kind of rework this piece. I would start with the hat. Okay, Sean, do you want to find 2 questions while we move on?
Yeah, actually somebody said they asked a question a little while ago, and we did not see it. So they can either put it again in there, or we can go search.
Yes, Sergeant Guava. Yeah. Could you put it in again?
Sergeant Guava.
Sergeant Guava. I guess we can find it. Hold on. Fluffy Healer says, using snowboarders jumping is also a good reference. Oh, yeah, because they're hanging upside down. That is a good reference.
You know what's an incredible reference? Dancers.
Dancers
are like literally looking up like dancing photography, or even too, you can even go into pole dancing. No.
I like stop thinking for a second.
You're just like, oh my god. But no. If you look up pole dancing reference and everything, these like poses that they're in are so like stretched out and they're flowing because they're complementing the actual pole with it, and it's just like it's such like an actual just beautiful reference. So go ahead and look at that. Some might not be safe for work. So
All right, the question from Sergeant Guava is, do you have any tips for starting to build a social media following from zero? If you had to start all over, what would you do? Good question. I think this is something that me and my roommates talk about often because social media is such a weird beast that we're trying to tame and understand and control. But I'm learning more and more you can't. A lot of the times there's a little bit of luck, there's good timing, and the one thing I will say is consistent though is post mostly art. I've seen a lot of people unfollow other artists because they post too many life things.
Yeah.
Post quality, I think it's very hard not to get a following if you have quality work. And then
Very true.
have a consistency in how often you're posting. I know me and my roommates, we all have kind of different levels of like, I like to post 1 or 2 a week. And people that follow me can look forward to that. Where someone that draws every day and they follow someone because they like following everyday artists, they expect that artist to post something every single day.
I feel bad because I'm kind of in an art slump. And so, like, I've been trying to post something, and it's been...
So, Sean is not in an art slump.
No.
He's doing very well. But we have conventions, so our time's being managed other places. But...
I'm struggling here sometimes.
Yes. And I think social media is such a weird thing. But the more that you do it, the better you understand it. At least a little bit. So my best advice would be at least to start it and get going and then kind of figure out what works, what doesn't. You can only learn from actually doing it. So that's my advice with Instagram or social media. Okay. Our next one.
You know, it's almost kind of fun because if you were to start back from zero, it's like you almost get like it's weird because I feel like my demographic is more tattoo based. Now it's starting to switch. Now I'm starting to see it switch.
The turnover rate.
Yeah, the turnover rate. But it's almost kind of fun because if, like, let's say you woke up and you had 0. And you'd almost be able to just, like, start completely of what you'd want to show.
Oh,
you know?
Pui, wait, come here. Everyone, we have a special guest here because actually we are all going to Spectrum Fantastic Art Live this upcoming weekend in Kansas City, Missouri. So we are taking a giant van and we're going to road trip it down starting tomorrow. So everyone, I'd like to introduce you to Pui Che. Pui.
Yes.
Pui.
Everyone.
He is a fantastic artist.
Oh, you smell nice.
I do.
Sean, can you type
Thank you.
Pui's Instagram?
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend checking out his work. He's a fantastic artist. He's been like my not necessarily rival. Yeah, we're more buddies at this point, but we're con brothers.
Pui is this, and then it's Pui Illustrate, right?
Pretty illustrated. So
Pui.
it's one less eye.
Yeah.
One eye.
Alright.
Pui and I started doing conventions together about 4 years ago, and we've learned so much. And I think the reason I respect Pui a lot is because he's one of those artists who are not afraid to fail. And over the years, we've failed a lot. We have failed plenty. There's been a lot of failures between the two of us. But because of that, now we're in a place when we go to conventions, I would say we're at least a little more comfortable and we have more of a game plan. We have more of a structure to the way we're setting up. And it's working. So I think for those that are wanting to get into doing conventions, don't expect things to work right away. And honestly, I've had a con where it was a local, very, very small con, but I've only made $80 before. And
I made $0 before too.
0?
Yeah.
You didn't sell anything?
Uh-huh. So there was quite an interesting set of experiments where money doesn't necessarily quantify what a convention scene is about. If you make less money, that means you gotta make it up by experience. So then you gotta, once you get home, you gotta decompress and figure out what are the things that you ought to learn from it. And as such, so then the next show you could be, more about balance.
Yeah. So don't get discouraged.
Right.
If anything, let it motivate you. And then look at booths that are working. Look at people that are successful at doing conventions. Ask them questions. Literally go up to their booth and maybe just start a conversation. Honestly, that's how we've met so many new people over the years, and we've learned from them. So, yeah, we're doing a critique stream, so I can get back on it.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So, everyone, Pui, thank you for joining us.
Have fun, kids. Stay in school.
This is a really good question, actually, this bottom one right here. Any tips in general for
Oh, it's
artists?
from Not. He's one of the guys that I met in England.
Oh, awesome. Any tips in general for artists like me who don't want an Instagram or Tumblr or most of these social sites? Should I just settle down in the comfort of flying under the radar? And I'm going to give you a big no. Actually, I honestly believe that if you want to, if your idea of success is having people kind of know your work and, and being able for people to find your work so you can create that success, that's what social media is. I think social media has a bad stigma at times to where,
Absolutely.
like an extremely bad stigma to where, it's like people like are sitting there and it's riddled with like opinions and everything like that. Like you're bad, blah, 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 stuff like that. But really there's also a good side to social media to where I've met so many people through it. And I've made so many like connections through it, and people have just been really, really, really like responsive, and it's just a very, very nice feeling for when you post something and people just really, really respond to it. Even if you don't get a huge response, there's still going to be one person out there that you're going to inspire, and that's normally what I kind of like social media for, rather than being well known. I just more or less just want to inspire other people.
That's cute.
Whatever. Hey, man.
No, but there's honesty there. I think we want to affect other people with our art. I mean, we all, or at least most of us, grew up kind of weird. Maybe the shy kid drawing in the corner.
Yep.
And now that we're older and we have more of these platforms to represent us as artists, I think you should use them. And maybe don't see them as a platform as like socially building up your reputation.
Yeah.
If anything, it should be an outlet for you to share your art with the world. That's kind of the way that I like to treat it. And treat it more like a game. I think if you treat social media too seriously, it can become an obsession, and I think it can be harmful. So now I treat it more like a game, and I have fun with it. And that's why I love going to conventions and meeting people that follow me, because it puts faces to the number. Okay, we got to move on. I know we're going a little slow here.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to move to, this is OD Lion Art. I want to say that's how you pronounce it. And real name Jari. So you asked about your cloth, the textures, and figuring out if it works. My initial response was, it feels like it's getting there. I can definitely clearly tell what the scene is trying to depict, which is great. That means it reads well enough for me to see what's going on. I think from this point forward, though, it's going to be adding more interest, having a more interesting composition, looking at the proportions of the characters themselves, and then even with the environment, I feel like the trees feel kind of slapped on, especially in the background. And I would just look at more actual trees and create more interesting shapes that maybe complement the overall character. The one thing I really like that you did is you have the recessive lighting where it's very light in the back. And the contrast of the character being so dark, your eye constantly gets pulled back up here, which is great. I think a little bit of that gets lost here. You could even lighten this tree a touch. But my main issues were with the way that he's freezing the ice. I think it works really well where he's actually touching it because it has that color breakup. There's variation, and there's even like little pockets of colors throughout that I like. But then as we get near the edge, it does look a little sloppy in the actual brush stroking. And I think it would look even cooler if you have more of a style to the way that it's freezing, where the water, as soon as it's being touched, the area next to it almost has like a what's that called? Where it like spreads out like a ice, like frost. It has a specific look, and I was looking at references, and I think Jack Frost from the Rise of the Guardians movie that DreamWorks did, they have a very stylized way of how Jack, freezes things. I mean, for me, it was awesome because I love filigree.
Yeah, what is that called?
I know. I was trying to look.
Flowers out or something like that.
I thought it was frosting, but I was like, that can't be it.
I don't know.
I'm not gonna Google frosting because I'm gonna get a lot of different results.
I never saw that movie.
It's worth it.
It was just visuals, like worth.
I really like
kinda.
Jack.
Yeah.
Oh, the Sandman was my favorite.
Tyler, he just meh.
Yeah, the Sandman made it for me. This is what I'm talking about, and maybe having that more on the edge. So then the breakup of it being so hard edged could be something. Now, mind you, this is a quick, sloppy paint over, but you can see it like spreading the frost
Ice
over the lake.
fractals.
Ah,
That's
thank
what
you.
it is. Thank you, Gypsy.
That's what it is. And I think having more of that would help make it look more like ice. The other thing that I want to compliment you on is you have this nice gradient from light to dark and then back to light. I think that's perfect because in the area that's the most cold seems to be the lightest, and then where it's already frozen over, it's like you can see the water underneath, but there is a layer of ice. So I think you are doing that well. I would just focus on the edge and keep looking at references of ponds, maybe having a few little cracks in the ice. Oh, that's too deep though. Very subtle. Even with that Beauty and the Beast movie that we watched, Belle was under the water, and the Beast, he like spread his hand or his paw over the snow, and you saw the ice in the water that was frozen over on the top.
Which one? The good one?
La Belle, the good one.
The good one, yeah.
The French one. And there was so much detail in just the ice itself. There was like cracks, and they weren't just on the surface, they were like below like in the interior of the actual ice itself. So I would work with more of that, and even having like little bubbles that got kind of trapped in the ice when it froze over. Things like that I think could really help. And lastly, before I pass it to Sean, was the anatomy of him. His shoulder that's further back. Let me redo what I... Here, if we're looking at his proportions, this arm feels rather right, but if we pull it back to the other side, his shoulder would probably be further up, and in doing so, his arm should be more up, and you can even show more of his arm then, which would give you a nice pocket of this light here, which this would create more interest within the character. I think having that be more of a darker shadow as well would help. He's wearing like this clothes. And the other thing is, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on with the back of his leg here. I could definitely tell it was a boot, but then down here it gets lost. I don't know if maybe you forgot it, but it seems like the boot then should come down as if he's stepping on, but it looks like the color of the floor that he's standing on. So with something like this, use a reference, and with his jeans, keep the seam on the side. Right now it looks very much in the middle of the pants going down, or like in the middle of the leg. So push it more onto the side. And those seam lines, I mean, actually now I'm looking at this closer, I think you meant to do leather or something, because the stitching is so big, it doesn't really represent jeans. But I would just keep it more on the side, unless if there's
also
a reason for that.
That curve wouldn't be there, where the pants curves up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that would.
This would be heavily wrinkled. Actually, this would.
I don't even think that would actually be there in general. I think that would just bring the shadow up. Like
Yeah,
all the
like
way,
it would just start. Yeah, this would go all the way up.
Mm-hmm.
So something to keep in mind. So I'm gonna paint over some of the materials on here, and then I'm gonna let Sean give his thoughts.
One thing that I noticed with this one is that the color of it, like everything was pretty much the same hue, and you can do that. That's something called an analogous color palette. But for this one, it just seemed like a lot of like the environment around it. It's very, very like all the same color and everything with like, and I also noticed too, like back here, like there seems to be like a little bit of like yellow or maybe like a little bit of red kind of popping out in the background. Like maybe you could bring that out from the background and just show maybe just a little bit different types of light, I guess. So it's something of just to kind of keep in mind to where like to make sure all your colors, like if you were to literally put this on grayscale, all your colors would be sitting in the same exact hue and value. So just trying to find like just a nice balance between like your warms and lights and everything, and not going too cool with everything and not going too warm with everything, if you want to create that contrast. One thing too is that composition. I know that Tim mentioned that you do know exactly where the focal point is, and I think that works. But I do want to mention something real quick with composition. Can I actually see this? Yeah. That do you have another layer that I can go on? One thing too is that so you have a small spiral, which is nice. That works. That works really, really well. But if you're going to use this much space, I think there should be something to where you can actually have a bigger spiral just to kind of create more interest going on. So it's something like this is maybe actually like something like this you can actually pull like maybe there's bits of ice kind of like coming off here and everything like that and going off into there and then kind of going here. And then with this right here, this could be something to where maybe he has like something that kind of goes like that and everything. Or just like a little thing or whatever. This too, you can also bring what is that? This too is another thing, like maybe you can bring another branch kind of closer. So you can basically just kind of create this composition that uses the whole frame rather than just that little bit. That's just one thing I noticed, especially with composition. The focal point is clear, which is very good. But if you're gonna do that big of a frame, utilize all of that space. Don't just put just negative space just anywhere where there's just kind of nothing to look at.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of dead air going on down here. Where it's really easy, or even like I was saying, have little hints of fish under the water or something to add just a little extra detail.
So that's basically just kind of create just a stronger spiral. One thing that just bugs me, I don't know if this is how it's supposed to, is that the mask. Would you see that much of the mask on the face, or would you see part of the face more, especially at that angle? Because I don't know if they're like turning their head slightly to where you'll see it, or like, because if you look at how like masks like sit on your face, sometimes it only just covers just like a little bit of this, and you actually see more of the side of the face from that angle. So I didn't know if that's how that went, or
He definitely pulled it back, so like this mask would go to here.
Yeah, so that was the one thing that I was just kind of.
It's like that black one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just a little confused on that. So,
but I do agree with Sean. Where then this side, it feels very flat. Where if you're seeing so much of the side of his face, the nose would probably be out a touch more. Because if it's a flat mask, where the nose is like flat with it, then this should be pushed out further. Because this feels very tight on his skin. So then the angle that we're drawing this at, you should see more of the brow and more of the nose. Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep moving because I know we're running behind already.
Oh, yeah. We're only on what, 5?
6.
6. Oh, we're on this one now.
All right. So let's just get one question here.
There is this one right
All
here.
right. Could you read that one?
Sorry to bring it back to social media topic again, but I get more attention whenever I post fan art, but it's not really what I want to do. Should I post my original art and hope people will stumble upon my art, or should I continue to do more fan art until I build a decent following? And I think both you and I can actually comment on this really well.
Yeah, I feel like we could do a whole stream on fan art versus original art. I feel like this is something artists, we like to talk about this all the time, especially in gaining traction and following or at conventions, what sells well. There's a lot to be said for each. The way that I've always explained it in the past year is I never look down at people doing fan art. And I think there are a lot of people that are like original only and people that do fan art, sell out, whatever. I started out doing fan art and it did help me get a little bit of a following. But what it helped me with is a few things. It kind of gave me reference for like what's trending in the market. Mm-hmm. It gave me something more to work on where I wasn't so much focused on the idea or the subject matter because it was already in front of me. It was interpreting it in my style and then executing it. So it gave me more work to do. And yeah, did I see more traction with my fan art early on? Absolutely. But if I did fan art now, I actually get less likes on it than I would on something that I do if I do an original. So it's almost flipped. So I was in your position a few years ago, and I understand where you're coming from. And no, you don't have to compromise. And if you're not enjoying doing fan art, don't do fan art. If you actually do enjoy making fan art,
yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah, Luabella93 just said Loesch started out doing fan art, and now she's one of the biggest digital artists. It's so true.
Mm-hmm.
So my whole opinion on that is do it if you enjoy it. If you genuinely enjoy doing it, and know that, yeah, it's probably getting more attention than your original work. But if your end goal is to do original art, then you almost have to do a phase out period where you're slowly doing less and less fan art and doing more and more original. And then eventually, after enough time passes, you're doing almost all original. And maybe every now and then you're doing a fan art piece. So don't get discouraged. If you want to do original art, it's definitely possible. It's only been a few years since I've gone from doing like half fan art, half original into doing all original. So it's just more of a thing of time.
Well, I think too it's also to do with the kind of like where your skill level is placed right now, because
Yeah.
I know that when I started out or doing Instagram and everything like that, like I would do a lot of Pokemon tattoos, and then people would look at that and be like, oh, he's a Pokemon tattoo guy. But the
Yeah.
thing is, though, is that how I would render them made the difference. So I rendered them into like adding, like adding it to more like if it was based off of like a 3D like model or like cartoon or something, like that, adding more dynamic shading or light or anything like that. And with that got people's attention to where they looked at it, and then I started to kind of look at it to where it's just like, I was getting really bored of just doing these fan art things, and so I started to kind of use the skills that I had to create strong original artwork. So if you have skills or if you have the skills to create strong fan art, that doesn't mean that you can't make strong original art that aren't going to get people talking.
True.
Either. So like I said, fan art it's fine. You can do it. I'm more of a person who always pushes for original art, especially if you have the skills to back it. So kind of go do that. I think it's I don't know. I'm more of an original art person, but fan art does have its advantages, especially when it comes to building a following.
Yeah, it's funny. You could almost have like an advantage disadvantage chart for each, and I bet we'd be able to fill it out pretty easily. Because original art, it's very easy. Advantage is you get to do your own thing. You have creative control, but disadvantage, people might not be interested. It's hard to market. Fan art, advantage, it's easy to market. People, it's instantly recognizable. Disadvantage, you might not be doing something that you love doing. And then we could make a little list off that. But we'll keep moving. We got 4 more to do, so we're going to try to get through these here. Okay. So this one is from Jensen. And he was wondering about his piece. Oh no, I'm losing my voice.
Uh-oh.
Okay. He was worried about it being detail crazy, the lighting that he was using, and the material variation. Was there enough? When I look at this, I can see a lot of time and effort being put into the actual piece itself. What I do also see, though, is a lack of focus, and there's no direction within it. So all of the art now gets kind of lost within itself, and it's almost overdone. You've gotten to a point where it's over-rendered. And I think my best example with this would be the logo bunny in the background. Rather than having drips literally on every inch or two, I think having less of them would actually make more of an impact than having it everywhere.
Believability.
Yeah. Like even in the small lines here, there probably wouldn't be a drip every 2 inches if they painted it on. If they were able to get such a thin line, they probably weren't working
That's
with
like
that much paint.
if that's like freshly painted, so with the amount of drips that it would have, it's almost the face itself would be kind of like dripping down. Yeah, like if you were to literally take the smudge tool and just kind of just pull everything down, like that's what that would look like if you wanted to make it that drippy.
Which I think there's some benefits to that, but overall, I think this is a perfect example of what's wrong with the rest of the piece. There's so much going on that it's hard to focus anywhere, and instead of you really being able to pick up the details, your eye almost gets so lost and it's moving around so much that you don't want to look at it for very long, unfortunately. Now, obviously, you're a very creative person. I see so much creativity within this piece. Everyone has a very unique outfit. They all feel like individual characters, and I like that you played with different sizes and shapes of the characters. Just from this point forward, work on focus, and your biggest thing is going to be editing, because you have so much creativity and it feels like you have such a patience for doing your art, but now it's going to be really zoning in and sharpening it, And my first thing that I did, and I was telling Sean, a simple gradient. Honestly, having a gradient from the bottom up immediately helps the viewer keep more of an eye level with the characters, and the eye now doesn't want to travel so far down because of how dark it is. So having a simple gradient like that can make a huge impact. And even from the sides if you'd want to give it more of a vignette. But in terms of the rendering of the materials, that's where I think I have some problems with it. A lot of areas feels very pillow shaded. The lighting doesn't feel real. And
Oh yeah, especially like the abs and like the arm and
yeah, like, and I think this goes back to what we were saying about
I love this dude though. He gives me like a Ninja Turtle vibe.
this one.
Yeah.
This kind of goes back to what we were saying about J-Mills, where I would just start working and incorporating cast shadows. Best example, girl holding this bat here, there should be a cast shadow on her hair. Because you can tell it's not squunching the hair, so it's actually above the hair, so it'd be casting a shadow. And that's where you can play with then the more sensibility of realism. The other example that I had before I added on the gradient was this bat is super light. And for this bat to be super light, but then the area right here to be super dark, it's inconsistent. Because if that light source was able to be that bright on the bat, it should be able to be just as bright on the floor next to it. So instead of making the floor brighter, I would actually make the bat darker and have the area on the ground, kind of like what we did with the gradient, just be more dark. But I would go back in and I would have to touch up the areas that still feel too light in the shadow. But what's fun is on areas that are in the shadow now, like let's say if there's any metallics, let's grab a lighter color, like on the, on the barbed wire here, you can add in, why is it still so dark? You could add in little specular highlights and it'll really pop out from far away. Mind you, sometimes less is more. That's my biggest thing with you.
That's like some brand new barbed wire.
What?
It's like some brand new barbed wire.
What are you talking about?
This is the shiniest barbed wire I've ever seen.
Have you ever seen barbed wire?
Yeah, it ain't shiny.
Maybe I'm thinking of something else.
Like I said, that's like out of the box barbed wire. They're like, hold up, I got a barbed wire on my bat real quick. Just got it from Amazon.
What are you talking about? Barbed wire is super reflective.
Yeah, when it's wrapped around like that. Either way. That looks, yeah, we're getting off topic.
Here's the reference I'm pulling from. So in areas where it would be reflecting the highlight, it would be a very light contrast.
That looks like brand new barbed wire. Most of the barbed wire that I see is all like rusty and poopy.
Maybe in Ohio. In Wisconsin, we replace our barbed wire. Anyways.
The character's from Ohio.
Okay.
Or no, the character's from Wisconsin.
You can see farther away, all of a sudden, those little pops of highlight stand out so much more. And it's like a little detail that your eye doesn't need to focus on, but it's there enough to clarify the material versus the wood bat or the jeans that he's wearing. And my other problem before passing it to Sean are the jeans themselves. This doesn't feel like jeans to me. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of styles that kind of interpret jeans differently. But in this case, it's the way that it's wrinkling. It doesn't feel like it would in reality. So what I would focus on, let me grab a light color, is being aware of where the tension is in your fabric. And in this case, it would be the knee. And yeah, you'd get some of these stretch lines, but the thing that I want to see more of is more squunch of the fabric, more scrunching. So having the diamond shapes that jeans make, and then having some lines that just go straight across. And if you shade that out, you'll see how it looks more realistic to a jean than having it just being pulled into the boot. And I see you do this in a lot of areas, especially like here. This doesn't make much sense either. This would actually read rather flat, for the way that the clothing would be. And then maybe near the belt it would be pulled in tight and they'd have some wrinkles coming out. But for the most part, this would actually be rather flat. And this kind of goes, what was the last one we were talking about? Oh, the boy witch. No. The first one, the hoodie one. having heavy wrinkles complement like very subtle, almost non-existent wrinkles. That's the best way to treat fabric because that's the way you'll get a more of a realistic touch. So I'm going to go through and do some of that while Sean's talking here.
I'm gonna kind of repeat what Tim said, and it's a lot of. Can you get rid of that window? That window's distracting me for some reason.
Yes.
So I'm gonna kind of repeat what Tim said, and a lot of it is less is more. There's a lot of texture going on, pretty much all over the place, and that's just something to know, like where to kind of put your texture and where to not put your texture. And something like that just comes with experience, so that's just something you have to keep working on and knowing like what you can and can't do with texture. But having a lot of texture, it almost creates kind of like what we were saying in the last piece, to where it was, there was like too much of the same color, so you couldn't really tell what was going on. With this one, has too much of almost the same textures going on, to where you don't really know where to look. This one, it doesn't really have a clear focal point or anything like that. I really like the characters. The characters themselves, I think, are really, really creative, kind of what Tim said. And I think they sit well together as a whole. But when you look at them individually and you look at each of the piece individually, there's just a lot going on with them. So it's basically just putting, like where you want to what you want people to look at first.
Where's the emphasis?
Yeah. Where's the emphasis? Another thing too that I said, that there are tangents all over the place. The biggest one being, I think, what would you say? I honestly would say right there. Yeah. There's that one. There's those two with the ears going up into like touching those.
Right here.
Yeah, right there. One thing too, I noticed right here, the bat and the foot. Right there, those two. The bat and the foot. Where else was there?
Oh, this elbow.
Yeah, that elbow. So it's just tangents everywhere. And
here.
Overlap is great. It really is. But if you have if you have too less of an overlap, they're all over the place, man. If you have too less of an overlap, it's gonna create awkwardness. And so it's picking and choosing what you want to overlap, what you don't want to overlap. And kind of just understanding, like really, really kind of like look at it from a far away. So like, let's say if you drew this crown with the bunny ears on it, and it's also tangenting with the vest right back here. Right there. Basically stepping back for a second and looking and seeing, is this something that makes sense? Is there enough structure there to separate it? If not, just move something over just a little bit. Just move it over to the side just a little bit, or maybe move the jacket over just a little bit. I was just really, really paying attention to where those lines are running into each other and creating awkwardness. That would I say would be one of the bigger issues that I have with this. I'm trying to think what else, if there's anything on my notes.
Our timer's already gone.
Yeah, you basically hit kind of everything to where,
So another thing is when you have so much, you lose some areas. Like as I was painting the abs or repainting them, I have no idea what these are going into his groin area. I don't know if that's supposed to be like the hair, the happy trail area, or if that's a tattoo, or if that's blood. I can't necessarily tell. And I think there's
happy trail area.
and even like the area in between the abs. Like I don't know what this diamond is. Mm-hmm. And as I paint it over, you can see how, was this the paint over? Yeah. How you simplify it, and all of a sudden it reads so much better. Because as I'm looking through, there's some areas where I don't know what it is. And I think this is another example. I have no idea what that is. So I think there are things that need to read better as the material that you're trying to represent. Because I can tell you have a lot of patience and you have the dedication to work on a piece. So now it's just working on refining. And once again, great job, Jensen. I always love when I see an artist that has patience and is willing to dedicate their time into a piece, because I think that's how you grow really fast. But start to learn how to edit. Okay. Moving on. All right, Faith.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
We'll save the questions for the end because we got to really pump through here. Okay, so you wanted, actually, this one we might even keep shorter just because I think we know what we want to say.
I think, well, you and I pretty much had the same exact notes on this one.
So, Faith, first, how can I not thank you for doing a Nate fan art? Obviously, super cool feeling to get fan art of your characters. And the thing that you were wondering was about lighting and perspective. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that's two things that feel a little wonky in the scene here. And the thing that really made me notice, because the perspective I didn't think was that off with the window, but then I realized how thick his leg was. And I think it was supposed to be like his leg was coming toward the camera, but then when you do that, having his hand and the bottle still be that relative size, it all of a sudden makes the leg look super big or the hand and bottle look super small. So keep your perspectives aligned because having a leg this thick next to the camera, you have to keep it consistent when working with perspective. Perspective's very, very difficult to work with, and I think I'm glad that I'm seeing you ambitious enough to try it, but use reference, please, and take your time with it. So in terms of the lighting, I actually like the color palette you have going on here. It's a very contrast of cool and warm lighting, so I like the play with that. I think the inaccuracies with the lighting, though, are what I want to touch on. First and foremost, I think this side of his face, I'm just going to make a multiply layer, would be more in shadow. And I was telling Sean while we were viewing these that this would be one of those few cases where I actually think a very strong rim light would actually be beneficial. Because oftentimes I think rim lights are just tacked on as an easy way to separate the background from the character. But I think when used effectively, it can make a really big impact. But otherwise, it almost, to me, looks very gimmicky. So let me go ahead. So I'm going to first darken the character. And I'm actually going to keep that side of his material more lit because the sun or the light would be coming through the fabric and we're seeing it on the other side. And then if you wanted to add in the secondary light, which you kind of did, I would lay it in, but I would lay it in softer. Blend, 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 blend. And or even this side, this should be darker. So imagine if this was beautifully rendered with the best of blending. And then on the outside edge, I would work in a really strong highlight here. Actually, not quite as strong.
That's like
on the
when
fabric.
like you said, it's when you should do that rim lighting.
Yeah, because I feel, like I said, oftentimes it just feels tacked on.
Look at that. That's beautiful.
Oh, something I should have done before I even did this was his proportions felt a bit wonky. And I think the biggest thing, kind of like reiterating what Sean said earlier, flip your image. Oftentimes you'll then break it down into the shapes. And in case of this one, you can see how far over his head is to one side when really it should be pulled back. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually merge these layers together. Then I'm going to liquefy it. So while I'm doing my paint over, I'm going to touch on the materials. I'm going to give it to Sean here.
With this is kind of just reiterating what Tim said with the lighting, especially with light, like kind of with this piece itself, the lighting's kind of the star of the show, and with what you had before.
Well, I thank you, Adobe BA for following. All right,
thanks. Anyway, but yeah, with this one, the lighting is pretty much the star of the show, and that's the utmost important, making sure that you get that right. So it's finding the right reference when it comes to this. So it's almost like looking for that that light that's kind of like that's pushing out behind you that can create that light, and you'll see like how dark the image might actually get, and then you'll have that strong rim lighting. Another thing too is with perspective, the bars, the window bars, are not really following the same shape that they should. So if you can actually create maybe a perspective grid for you, or almost even finding reference of a window at that angle, and kind of placing that to where you kind of remake those lines, or using that to draw those lines in and figuring out where that is. I would say that's with that. I actually really like how you did the lighting, like the colors and everything with the lighting. It really, really sells the kind of like either it's. Would you say that's morning light, or would you say it seems kind of morning lightish?
Almost. It feels
Yeah,
artificial to me.
Yeah.
Which is good, because I feel like it's an artificial light source.
Mm-hmm. But I actually really like the colors that you use. So you understand colors, which is really nice. And then also too using cool shadows, which is really awesome. What was another thing too? Oh, also too with composition. Another thing, there is a small spiral. Again, there's a soft tangent. And what that is basically, so you have the A, that's an A, right?
Yeah.
So that's a soft tangent, and that's basically just what your eye is going around. It's going in this very small circle, just over and over and over and over and over and over. And that's okay to a point. It all depends on really what you want to show. So the focal point is clear. You can see his face and everything like that, but just remember that soft tangent is running into the arm, kind of running up against, like, it's basically just following this, running up into the neck, and then also it's a little close to the head and everything. Soft tangents, you can work with them, you can get away with them, but it's still something just to kind of recognize of what's happening and if you want to use it to your advantage or not. What else we got here? Also another compositional tangent is, I think he's too close to the end, like to the edge of the frame.
Oh, like here.
Yeah, I think he's a little too close. I think you can move him over just a smidge, or maybe just moving the arm over. I like that he's in the bottom left corner. So I would say maybe just move his arm over just a little bit. But yeah, just to pay attention to where those tangents are, and recognizing what your soft tangents are too as well. And kind of what Tim said, the biggest thing is with lighting, is understanding lighting. Lighting's hard, but it's something that if once you understand, like, you can use it to your advantage, and you can make like so many amazing pieces off of it.
The last few notes I want to give is have fun with areas of isolation with your secondary light. So you can see how I pull in sort of this lighter purple color. I'm going to add it only really to the upper, maybe a touch on the bicep, but I'm not going to bring it down here because that area is more in shadow. So this is another example of using a gradient without it having to be like a giant mass gradient. It's a very subtle texture gradient in the way that I'm rendering the material. So then I might even bring like a little highlight area to the top of the shoulder. And I would bring that throughout, and I would bring that to the rest of the character in the way that I'm doing his arms. I try to do it pretty quick, but you kind of get the picture when I turn it on and off. How this area is still too dark, and I think having the secondary light just be more subtle can have a huge impact if you render it correctly. So then even like bringing some of these lighter colors here and then blending it out. I'm gonna do a quick blend though.
I know that we have to move on, but would you say that you would actually push this shirt out more? Like, I know it's hanging, and like, I don't know if it's like hanging too much. Yeah, just to push it out just a little bit more, so you'd see more of the body on that side. I don't know if you'd see that from that angle.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how big, that's the thing, like, I don't know how big the shirt is or all that stuff.
The other thing is, make sure that if you're going to do suspenders, keep them tight, because suspenders usually aren't pretty loose. They're meant to hold your pants up. So if he's wearing them above their shoulders, there shouldn't really be any wonky bends. They should be rather straight, actually. So even that, like, even this, I could probably straighten out here. Okay, we're going to move on to the next. All right, 2 more, everyone. I know we're definitely going to go over. All right, so we're just going to jump into it. This is Big-Eyed Bug 15, better known as Sammy.
Big Eye Bug 15. I love them. That's a good one.
So with yours, you were asking about rendering, the color, the atmosphere, and looking unfinished. Actually, while I paint over it, Sean, could you start this one? I'm going to get more tea.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you need the pen.
So, whoa, there you go. So with this one, I actually really enjoyed the textures that you did use. It's kind of similar to a old master where his name's John Singer Sargent, and it looks really, really wonderful, and you understand colors really really well. The only thing is with the colors is they seem a little washed out. You're using primary colors, which is fine. You have blue and then red and then yellow. Those are kind of like your prominent colors in it. So with that, as I think you can actually push your colors a little bit more to kind of make them all contrast a little bit. I had to take off my glasses. I have computer glasses, and they have a little bit of a yellow tint, so they take away from the color sometimes. But anyway, so with this, one thing too though that I also noticed is that with the characters behind them, create more differentiation to where you have all these what is it? Here, I'm gonna actually move over here real quick. You have all these really, really nice like shapes and everything, but they're all going pretty much in a straight line to where it's kind of hitting that. And the only differentiation that you have is from here to here. I'm actually going to get a better color real quick. And so with this is I'd honestly take this one and maybe moving this guy down a little bit more to where he's over here, and this is kind of up over there. This is fine right here, so you kind of create this shape, and then you can either bring it back down if you want to create more of a centered composition, or you can take something to where maybe you can add something like right here and then have that almost going completely off, or just another helmet itself just being right there. So it kind of creates like that. But to me, I think center composition works real well, so you don't really have to worry about that too much. What else do we have here? There's also a bunch of tangents a little bit, kind of like what I was saying, to where this right here is a little too close to the frame, so that's something that I would work on. Make sure that you're recognizing that and just taking that step back and realizing like, oh yeah, is this something that works? Is it something that doesn't work? One thing too, this hand, now that I'm seeing it, I know Tim's probably going to get more into anatomy. This hand seems a little bit small. So I think maybe you should push it out just a little bit to where it might be right here, and it could show more of a grip, rather than being so like squeezed together and everything, because you can already see like kind of how big this hand is, and also too with the arm itself, they seem very big. So this guy I think would have, I would at least hope he would have big hands. But he seems like a very large warrior with very small hands. Also too, the focal point gets lost, and that's something that I think Tim is going to bring up to where he shows, I think he's going to show like a soft gradient and everything, because clearly you want people to look at this guy. That's what you want to see. And right now, I think what my eye goes to the most is, for some reason, right here, and then also right here, because there's the most interest going on right over here. So yeah, pretty much just pay attention to those tangents, create more differentiation over there. Sorry, Tim, I like drew all over it. Create more differentiation between the helmets, just because you have that straight line going on. And then also to pay attention to the anatomy that you have, because those hands do seem kind of small. And also to his waist seems really, really, really high. Either that he has like the longest legs in the world, or he has the shortest torso in the world. I don't know, or the longest torso. So yeah, so I'm gonna pass it off to Tim. Hopefully that was helpful. Whoa, I'm hitting stuff over here.
You're always hitting lamps.
I know. When we were in the hotel, I hit my head like 4 times on that stupid cage light thing.
You're just too tall.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm super tall. 5'6", everybody. I'm insanely tall.
So I'm not sure what Sean said, but I'm sure it was a lot of the points that I wanted to make.
Mine was more based on composition.
Okay, then I'll talk about, I feel the proportions are rather off. It feels stiff, and there's a lack of focus. And there's a lot of areas that feel pillow shaded, and it's complemented by areas that actually feel very well rendered. So it's interesting because you have some great bounce light coming back on these feathers because the light seems so intense, and it's an overhead, I assume, daylight. And the ground is very light, and because of that, the ground is bouncing the light back onto the underside of the feathers. My problem, though, is if you have such an intense light, the shadows need to be more intense, and the cast shadows themselves need to be tighter. I feel like you actually do have a few areas that do represent cast shadows, like here and here, but then this all feels very muddy. I would just almost make this completely dark. And then the area right under here, I would also make darker. So don't be afraid of shadows. I think often as artists we're told to avoid white and black, which is true, but that doesn't mean that you need to avoid getting dark or getting light. You can still get dark with different colors, and you can still get light with different colors. So like the bottom of this fur, I think could be darker. There's another area where I don't really know what this is, and I think it's the way that you rendered the material. I assume it's like the fluff on the front of a bird, but I think because it's rendered in a way that is elusive or more vague, I can't quite tell what it is. So my suggestions, and did you talk about the proportions?
I talked about the hands. Because if you look at this hand, it looks like really, really like squished.
The hands are very, 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 very small.
Yeah, yeah.
You would need to show more of the other side of the hand and make the gauntlet bigger. Or if you want him to hold it and have the arm more pulled back, then I would even bring the shoulder area up and then have the arm coming more toward us and work with more perspective. I like working with orthographic, so I understand why you did it.
I will say, I love this area.
Yeah,
Like right
you have
there,
great lines
like,
bringing your eye up. And like I said, you have an understanding of lighting because even bounce light of the sky on the inside of the shadow in the flag. And the way that you rendered the material of him grabbing the flag is very well done.
Drapery, too.
It feels like this was using reference, but then this was not, because this does not feel like drapery. These would probably be more loose, where right now they're so much the same squiggle that it depends on, I would have to see like where this flag is being pulled. But the way that it's looking to me, I would actually make this more flat and then bring it around. The suggestions I had with the paint over, one was a gradient, of course. But what I didn't do is I didn't erase the part of the gradient underneath. So 1 second. Kind of re-emphasizing the point that, oops, oh yeah, this gradient was way too dark. Where if you want the attention and the focus to be up here, bring everything you can, not only in the scene, but the way that you're rendering or the way that you're adding light and color, have it being pulled into this area. So having a nice gradient, it doesn't, without it, your eye kind of wants to go down here because there's fun contrast areas where you could almost take it out. Well, I guess you want to see the dead warriors. So I would just work with more composition, and then his pose is very, 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 very stiff. I would bring out, and I would actually shorten the legs. They feel very long. But then I would just make them, give him some strong legs and a more powerful stance. Right now it looks like he's leaning forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very strange position. So I would just, you could even liquefy him back almost.
I would say, too, the chest plate seems a little bit turned too much, especially for how he's facing. So maybe just bringing the, like, the...
it's too far turned.
Yeah, the actual,
way.
like, yeah, the actual breast part should be moved back a little bit more.
Where the center should be, like, here instead of here. Okay, so that's our advice with that one. Oh, and well, thank you, H_Henry, for subscribing for 3 months. You get a fridge.
You get a fridge.
You get 4.
You get 4
Okay.
fridges.
Oh, one more.
You good?
I think so.
You good?
Let's just say I'm glad we're on the last one here. My throat is not a happy camper. Okay, so this is Nozomi, and what they wanted was they felt their piece looked flat. They wanted epic. They're wondering about their anatomy and avoiding blacks. Was it right to do that for the scene? For an artist, it's always good to avoid blacks. And like I just said with the last one, you can go dark without having to rely on black. There's other colors you can go dark with, even an orange, or you can go dark with a yellow and still create a shadow. The biggest problem I had...
Get some tea in you.
I know, it's just too hot. The biggest problem I had was I thought this front area... I thought that was a boat for the longest time looking at this. I thought it was like an abandoned boat that crashed onto the edge of like a shore.
I can see it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought they were fighting a snake, and then I was like, oh wait, but it has like it's a one-winged snake. I was like, okay,
snake.
no, it's definitely a dragon.
Okay,
Or I would think. So the wing in the front did not read well to me at all, and I think part of the reason is because of this really bad tangent. This boat almost connects in, or this wing almost connects into the body of the dragon itself, and that misread me so bad. And as the viewer, you want it to be as clear as possible to the viewer what they're looking at, and then you want them to explore within the piece. But if they can't decipher what's going on right away, you lost them a bit, and then they have to like figure it out. You never want someone to have to figure out what you tried to create. Not so much like if they're trying to figure out the story, that's a different thing altogether. But they're just trying to figure out what exactly they're looking at. Sometimes that's a problem. The proportions, you're right, I think are a bit wonky. The guy's shoulders, it almost feels like it's liquefied down, or it's like melting down. I almost feel like with this, you can do a really easy pass with liquefy. All of a sudden his shoulder just feels more accurate, and same with his body. And then with this other character, the waist felt too high, so you can just bring that down. And what's great about the way you render, you can see before and after, is you have such strong rendering skills.
Oh yeah, I was about to mention that.
Like, I know that we might be critiquing it pretty harshly, but it's only because of how strong of an artist you are. So we're pushing you because I see so much strength within the different pieces of this composition. It just, as a whole, the puzzle doesn't fit. Even the area with this head, the way that you rendered the top of the scales with the top of the scales casting a shadow, and then you can still see some of the light before the neck itself rounds out and it wouldn't be catching the light anymore. It's wonderful. Like, honestly, great. I would pull more of that lighting of the back onto the horn itself. And I love that the wing, there's subsurface scattering within the skin of the wing. And that light orange, is like the color of the scene. It really is inviting to the viewer. And the background, I think, is good. It's simple enough where it complements what's going on. And I like that you have some recessed lighting where it becomes lighter on the cliffs. That's great. But the area in the foreground, I think you could almost take it out.
That's what I was thinking. Or you can actually change that.
Rework the wing.
Well, you can rework the wing, or you can actually change it to where, like, you can actually make this whole part right here, you can actually make that the body. Like, if he were to almost, like, the body would be here, and he would just be scooping around, and you can actually see him.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Well, and the other thing...
You can just get rid of that wing in the back and then maybe put something else there, like maybe like an airship or something like that in the background.
Well, what's crazy about this is you wanted to go for epic, but I feel everyone feels so dead. They feel flat. If you really wanted epic...
It's just like, we got him.
Yeah. So if you want to go for epic, first thing, work on their faces. The fact that this guy's just like, yep, we got him. It's like his mouth's closed. I would have him screaming. I would have his eyes like he's pulling it in. He's using every muster of strength he has to pull it in. where like the rope doesn't feel very tight to me at all.
Mm-mm.
The dragon's like, well, whatever, I guess I'm caught. And even with the dragon himself, or herself, I would change this expression to be more of a scowl. I would actually make the eye bigger. Somehow, even maybe give it an eyeball or pupil or something where you can tell that it's angry, and then maybe have like some of the mouth open, so it's like struggling to get out of this tie that's kind of around the front of his nose there. Because right now it just feels
Just quiet.
very casual, and I
Yeah.
feel like this rope would slip off. So if the dragon just like pulled up, I mean the rest of the dragon goes inward, so the rope itself would just kind of fall off. If the rope was more like around his neck, and there was like multiple, and like let's
Yeah,
say
that's
this
what I
guy
was
was
thinking,
having
yeah,
one, and then this guy had, or maybe he has the same,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it's snapping. But for them to be able to get it around the dragon's mouth, it just makes me question, how the hell did that happen? Like, did they come up to it while it was sleeping and like quickly wrap it around before it like jolted up? So I think maybe just think of the story elements and really play the scene in your head. How did this work? And then play with your composition. You have such fantastic rendering skills. And I think if you just took a little bit more time with your composition and figuring out the story, you can make it feel epic so easy. And the other thing is play with your perspectives. That usually will make something feel more epic. If you have a dynamic angle, there's a lot of action, people are in poses where they're very emotional, that will make a very epic scene. All right, Sean, do you want the last minute?
Yeah. I'm actually going to point out something that, point out something, and it's something that I always see in compositions, especially with compositions with like swooping and stuff like that. So I always call this composition flaw, is I call it triangle vision. And what it is that, so you have something that is basically creating a spiral. And that's good. That's good. But if you really, really, really look at the composition and see, you can see that there's literally a glaring triangle that's right there.
Again, sorry.
Yeah. You have a glaring triangle that's literally right there. And for the most part, I would say that actually for this composition, it's more, so I would say it's more like that. And you never, with these types of compositions, especially where things are going like, let's say, to the side or like near the edge of the thing or anything like that, you never want a composition in any type of spiral, or you never want a triangle in any type of this type of composition. Triangles work well when it comes to center framing. So let's say you have this a composition, and if you were to have something like this, you can literally build upon that to where it's just like, oh yeah, triangles, and things can just move into there. That's where triangles work well. They work well in any type of center frame, but this right here, this needs to be more spiral rather than this. So to break that up, honestly, I would say kind of what we were saying, to where if you had this be the body and it was almost turning, you can have spikes kind of moving. I know it's a little bit. You can have spikes almost moving.
I'll just give you a new layer.
Yeah, I know. I'm just scribbling all over
there
it.
you go.
But yeah, so if you have this, that like that, you can literally bring these spikes, bring them up, and then that's literally going to put enough emphasis to where it's just like, okay, and same with this, to where it's like breaking up, like, oh yeah, this guy's got one, and then they got that, that's going to create enough emphasis to where it's just like, okay, there's not a triangle, it's just a full like spiral right in the way.
Or, even going off of, if we're playing this as the body, maybe having someone more in the foreground.
Yeah,
Imagine
yeah.
if their rope was coming from way over here. And like having that guy over there, however doing it. So play with your perspectives. Like right now, the guys are kind of on the same plane with the dragon. And I think I agree with Sean. Play with your foreground elements.
Yeah, that was another thing I was going to say, is that, yeah, everything's pretty much in the mid-ground, to where it's just like you have, like, I mean, clearly you have the skills to make, a beautiful piece, but it's just figuring out where those compositional flaws are, and just basically just kind of just, boom, just putting them right there. And then I think you were like, I feel like with just a few things, and just a little bit more time put into this, you would have just a wonderful piece to look at.
Actually, I think I'm going to say something to you, and it's going to come off really harsh, only because I've been told this myself, and it was very hard for me to hear at first, but I'm glad that that person told me. And you have great rendering abilities, but you're relying on it to make up for bad composition.
Yes.
You know that whatever you create, you can render and you can detail, and it'll look beautiful, but you're not taking the opportunity to really look at the composition or other elements that you might be weaker in. So I understand where you're coming from. I often draw things like in the middle, and I don't play with elements in foreground or background as much, and it's because I rely on the fact that I know I can render things. So I'm challenging you, as I feel I need to challenge myself more, to play with that and to not rely so heavily on your rendering ability and look at your weaker points and try to work on those. So, okay.
Yeah.
That's all 9, Sean.
That's all of them.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go to sleep. Thank you all for joining. And next week, we're going to do the last request, which was, I know we started with a life drawing, then a critique. And the next week, you guys wanted to see my art through the ages and see where I came from and how I've progressed and maybe my weaker points back in college.
Biography? Are you basically doing like a
I'm like show them my art,
That's
and then I'll show them like my pinnacles in my art, and then definitely my downs and where I could tell even in my work I wasn't getting it. But I think it's good to see where someone like myself started as, because I wasn't able to render materials 7 years ago. Like it took, a lot of time and practice to get to the point where I'm at now. And even now, as I'm saying this, I feel like I have so much more to go that it's almost crazy giving you guys a timeline. But since it was requested, and since I do think I've seen enough growth within my own work where I can share it and kind of point out to you guys where there were significant points. Thank you. Where?
They showed up right here.
Oh, yeah, thank you for following. So that's what's going to be happening next week. And then all of May, we have a lot of fun streams coming up. I'm excited for those. The only hint I'm going to give you is kart racing. That's all I'm going to say. And thank you again, Sean, for helping me talk today. You have great advice, great input, so I'm glad that you were here. And my voice thanks you more than anything.
I feel like you still did a lot of talking, though.
More than I should have.
Oh, you have a question for a sketchbook update.
Yes, I will do that. So thank you guys for coming. These are always fun to do. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Oh, you know what? I guess we should do one more question since we kind of skipped questions after the 6th one.
I don't remember what we said. I'm sorry, Tijol. I don't know what we said.
Oh, for Tijol, just know that we're moving. So starting in June or sometime this summer, hopefully June, the community will be integrated into the new cgcookie.com. The new cgcookie.com, let me tell you, looks fantastic. Like everything is integrated on there. The contests have their own page. It looks really nice. It looks like a DeviantArt contest where it's laid out, it's separated, it has its own section where it doesn't feel like a blog or a forum post. So I'm really excited about that. Know that the prizes are going to be doubled. So literally first, second, and third, we're going to double the amount of prizes. And I'm going to throw in a few other goodies and some special guest artists. And what else is coming out soon? I think those are the big updates. We have the first-person shooter course that the 3D people of the crew are really pushing through. I got my section done. Ching. But
Oh, no, don't die! Oh, that's it.
Oh, that's gross. That's gross.
Over.
All right, clearly I need to stop talking. And thank you, Sir Yasin, for following. Okay, I gotta go. I gotta get something in me. But thank you again, Sean. Really, that helped out.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, take care, guys. Talk to you later.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye.
Tyler says bye.